The sea had always been my mistress, cruel, unpredictable, but honest in her violence. I had sailed her waters for 15 years, from the Mediterranean to the Baltic, carrying timber, spices, and secrets I never asked about. But on that October night, as our merchant vessel cut through the black waters off the Transylvanian coast, I learned that the sea could betray even her most faithful servants. The storm came without warning. One moment the stars hung clear and cold above us. The next, the sky split open with lightning that turned the world white, and thunder shook the very bones of the ship. Captain Andrei, a Romanian who'd grown gray navigating these waters, screamed orders that were swallowed by the wind. I grabbed the rigging, my hands already bleeding from rope burn, as waves the size of cathedral walls crashed over the deck. "Turn her into the wind!" Andrei's voice was raw with desperation. "Turn her, damn you all!" But the sea had made her choice. A wave struck us broadside, and I heard the sickening crack of timber splitting. The mainmast came down like a felled tree, crushing 2 men I'd shared bread with that very morning. The deck tilted at an impossible angle, and I lost my footing, sliding toward the churning black water that seemed to reach up hungrily for us all. I don't remember going into the sea. I remember only the cold, a cold so absolute it felt like teeth sinking into every inch of my flesh. I remember the taste of salt and blood. I remember screaming for God, for my mother, for anyone who might hear a drowning man's final prayer. The water pulled me down into absolute darkness, and then nothing. I woke to the sound of waves lapping gently against stone, as if the sea were trying to apologize for her fury. My lungs burned. My throat was raw from salt water and screaming. Every muscle in my body felt like it had been stretched on a rack, but I was alive. Slowly, painfully, I opened my eyes. Gray dawn light filtered through a thick mist that clung to everything like a funeral shroud. I was lying on a beach of black sand and jagged rocks, my fingers still clutching a piece of broken timber that must have kept me afloat. The wreckage of our ship was nowhere to be seen, only pieces of it scattered along the shore like the broken bones of some great beast. I tried to sit up and immediately regretted it. Pain shot through my ribs and I tasted blood. Broken ribs, certainly. Possibly internal bleeding. I'd seen men die from less after shipwrecks. But lying here would only make the beach my grave, so I forced myself to move. The island, for I could see now that I was on an island, not the mainland, rose sharply from the beach. Dark cliffs of stone climbed toward a sky that seemed perpetually overcast, even as dawn broke. Thick forests of pine and twisted oak covered the slopes, their branches reaching toward each other like the fingers of desperate men. And there, impossibly high above it all, perched on a cliff that seemed to defy the laws of nature, stood a castle. Even through the mist, I could see its dark spires piercing the gray sky like accusing fingers, Gothic towers and battlements of black stone that seemed to absorb what little light touched them. No smoke rose from its chimneys. No flags flew from its ramparts. It looked less like a dwelling and more like a monument to some ancient, forgotten sorrow. I had sailed these waters many times. I knew every island, every inlet, every treacherous reef along the Transylvanian coast. This island was not on any map I had ever seen. The logical part of my mind, the part that had kept me alive through storms and pirates and disease, told me to explore the beach, to look for other survivors, to find fresh water and shelter. But something deeper, something primal that lived in the oldest parts of my brain, whispered a different message. Leave this place, even if you have to swim until your strength fails and the sea takes you properly this time. I ignored that whisper. I was a practical man, a sailor, not some superstitious peasant who saw devils in every shadow. The castle meant civilization. Civilization meant people. People meant help, food, perhaps even a boat to return to the mainland. I began to climb. The forest was wrong. I realized it within the first 100 yards. The trees were too silent. No birds sang in their branches. No insects hummed in the undergrowth. Even the wind seemed reluctant to move through these woods, as if it feared disturbing something that slept here. My boots, waterlogged and heavy, squelched with each step. I'd lost my coat in the wreck, and my shirt was torn and crusted with salt and blood. The October air cut through the wet fabric like knives, but I welcomed the pain. It meant I was still alive, still feeling, still fighting. The path I followed was barely visible, more of an animal trail than a road, but it led upward toward the castle, and that was all that mattered. Twice I had to stop to rest, my broken ribs screaming with each breath. Twice I considered turning back. But where would I go? Back to the beach. To die of exposure or starvation while waiting for a rescue that would never come. No, forward was the only direction left to me. As I climbed higher, I began to notice things, strange things. Symbols carved into the bark of certain trees, circles within circles, crosses turned upside down, words in a language I didn't recognize, piles of stones arranged in patterns that seemed deliberate but meaningless. And once, hanging from a low branch, a wreath of dead flowers and what looked like human hair, woven together and left to rot. The rational part of my mind tried to explain it away. Local customs, pagan remnants from before Christianity reached these shores. Nothing to fear, but my hands were shaking, and not from the cold. The castle grew larger as I climbed, its dark walls resolving into greater detail. I could see now that it was ancient, medieval at least, perhaps older. The architecture was Gothic, all pointed arches and flying buttresses, but there was something else mixed in, something that predated even that. The stone itself seemed to radiate a chill that had nothing to do with the October air. I emerged from the forest onto a narrow road paved with moss-covered stones. This was definitely man-made, maintained perhaps, though by whom I couldn't guess. The road curved upward, following the contour of the cliff, leading to a massive gate set into the castle's outer wall. The gate was open, not just unlocked, open as if someone had been expecting visitors. As if someone had been expecting me. Every instinct I possessed screamed at me to run. But run where? Back to the beach? Into the forest? I was injured, exhausted, and lost on an island that shouldn't exist. The open gate represented shelter, warmth, perhaps even help. I stepped through. The courtyard beyond was a study in Gothic decay. Cracked flagstones were overgrown with weeds that seemed to thrive despite the absence of sunlight. A fountain stood at the center, its basin dry and filled with dead leaves. Its statue, some ancient goddess I didn't recognize, staring down with empty stone eyes. The walls rose on all sides, 3 stories of dark windows that reflected nothing, not even the pale morning light. "Hello?" My voice cracked, hoarse from salt water and screaming. "Is anyone here? I need help." The only answer was the echo of my own desperation bouncing off cold stone. I crossed the courtyard slowly, favoring my injured side. There were several doors leading into the castle proper, all of them dark wood, reinforced with iron bands. I chose the largest, a double door beneath a pointed arch, and pushed. It swung open silently, as if the hinges had been recently oiled. The entrance hall beyond stole what little breath I had left in my damaged lungs. It was vast, impossibly vast, stretching upward 3 full stories to a vaulted ceiling painted with frescoes that time and moisture had rendered into abstract nightmares. 2 grand staircases curved upward on either side, their balustrades carved with faces, human faces twisted in expressions of ecstasy and agony. Candelabras hung from the ceiling on chains as thick as my arm, but no candles burned in them. The only light came from narrow windows set high in the walls, and it was cold and gray and utterly cheerless. "Hello?" I called again, and again received only echoes. I moved deeper into the hall, my wet boots leaving prints on the marble floor. There were paintings on the walls, portraits of stern men and beautiful women in clothing from centuries past. But something was wrong with the paintings. The faces seemed to follow me as I passed, their eyes tracking my movement in a way that made my skin crawl. At the far end of the hall, beneath the largest portrait of all, a pale man with dark hair and darker eyes, dressed in black and crimson, stood a table. And on that table, impossibly, sat a silver tray bearing bread, cheese, wine, and a goblet. The bread was still warm, my stomach clenched with hunger so fierce it was painful. I hadn't eaten since before the storm, nearly 24 hours ago by my reckoning. The logical part of my mind, growing quieter by the moment, warned me that this was wrong. That warm bread didn't simply appear in abandoned castles, that someone had placed this here and that someone was watching. But I was starving, injured, and half dead from exposure. I stumbled to the table and fell upon the food like a wild animal. The bread was the finest I'd ever tasted, soft and rich with butter. The cheese was sharp and creamy. The wine, God, the wine was like nothing I'd ever experienced, smooth and warming, spreading heat through my frozen limbs with each swallow. I ate until my shrunken stomach protested, and then I ate more, washing it all down with wine that seemed to make the pain in my ribs fade to a distant ache. When I finally stopped, gasping and ashamed of my desperation, I realized I wasn't alone. She stood at the base of the left staircase, so still that I hadn't noticed her arrival. Or perhaps she had been there all along and the wine had clouded my senses. She was tall, slender, dressed in a gown of deep crimson that seemed to move in a breeze I couldn't feel. Her skin was pale, not the healthy paleness of northern women, but a whiteness that seemed to glow faintly in the dim light. Her hair fell in dark waves past her shoulders, and her eyes. Her eyes were the color of old blood, and they looked at me with an expression I couldn't name. Not quite hunger, not quite pity. Something in between, something that made me feel like a rabbit caught in a trap, bleeding and waiting for the fox to arrive. "You're awake," she said, and her voice was like music played in a minor key, beautiful and deeply sad. "I was beginning to worry you wouldn't survive the night." My mouth opened, but no words came out. Fear had locked my throat closed. She smiled, and I saw the points of her canine teeth, just a little too long to be natural. "You needn't be afraid. You're a guest here, and guests are sacred. No harm will come to you within these walls." She paused, tilting her head in a gesture that was disturbingly bird-like. "Unless you wish for it, of course. I shipwrecked," I finally managed to say, my voice barely above a whisper. "My ship went down in the storm. I woke on the beach. I need to get back to the mainland. I need help." "The mainland," she repeated, as if the word were foreign to her. "Yes, the mainland." She began to descend the stairs, each step deliberate and graceful, her gown whispering against the stone. "I'm afraid that won't be possible. Not yet. The sea around our island is temperamental. She doesn't like to let go of what she brings us." "Our island?" I backed away instinctively as she approached, my hands gripping the edge of the table. "Who are you? Who lives here?" "I am Carmilla," she said, stopping a few feet away from me. This close I could see that her beauty was perfect, too perfect. Not a single flaw marked her porcelain skin. Not a hair was out of place. She looked like a painting come to life, and the effect was deeply unsettling. As for who lives here, we are the brides, the forgotten wives, the eternal companions of a lord who no longer comes to call. Brides? The word felt heavy on my tongue. "You're married?" Her laugh was like breaking glass. "In a manner of speaking, we were promised to Count Dracula himself, transformed by his gift, made immortal to stand at his side through eternity. But eternity is longer than love, it seems. He tired of us, or perhaps we reminded him too much of his humanity. So he placed us here, on this island that exists between the world of men and the world of the dead. And here we remain." My blood had turned to ice in my veins. Count Dracula. The name was legend along the Transylvanian coast, a monster from old stories, a warning parents gave to misbehaving children. Not real. Couldn't be real. "You're mad," I whispered. You're just women. Eccentric, perhaps, but just women?" Carmilla's eyes flashed with something dangerous. "Oh, my poor shipwrecked sailor. You understand so little." She moved closer, impossibly fast, and suddenly her face was inches from mine. I could smell her, roses and decay, perfume and tomb dust. "We were women once, daughters of nobility, given to the Count as tribute, as offerings, as sacrifices. He made us immortal with his bite, filled us with his blood, bound us to darkness forever. And then, when he grew bored of our company, he imprisoned us here with his beasts and his magic, to wait and watch and hunger." "Hunger," I repeated, understanding flooding through me with terrible clarity. You're vampires." "Such an ugly word," she said softly. "But yes, We are the undead, the cursed, the damned. Her hand reached up to touch my face, and her fingers were cold as winter stone. And you, poor mortal man, you have washed up on our shore like a gift from God himself. If God still remembers this place, I should have run, should have fought, should have done anything except stand there, frozen, as her fingers traced the line of my jaw. But the wine had made me slow, and her eyes held me like a moth pinned to a board. "Will you kill me?" I asked, surprised by how calm my voice sounded. "Kill you?" She seemed genuinely puzzled by the question. "Why would we kill you? Death would be mercy, and mercy is not something we have in abundance anymore." Her thumb brushed across my lower lip, and I felt my heart hammering against my broken ribs. "No, sweet sailor, we're going to keep you. We're going to show you pleasures and terrors you cannot imagine. We're going to make you choose again and again between your mortality and our eternity. And if I refuse," her smile was radiant and terrible, "then you'll die eventually anyway, and we'll have had such lovely company in the meantime." She leaned closer, her lips nearly touching my ear. "But I don't think you'll refuse. I can smell your loneliness, your desperation, your hunger for something more than the life you left behind. The sea knew what she was doing when she brought you here. Before I could respond, before I could even process her words, she was gone, simply vanished, as if she'd never been there at all. I spun around, heart racing, and found myself alone in the vast entrance hall. Alone except for the sound of laughter, soft, feminine, multiplied, echoing from somewhere deeper in the castle. The brides were waiting, and I, God help me, began to walk toward that laughter, drawn forward by a force I couldn't name and didn't understand. Perhaps it was curiosity, perhaps it was despair, perhaps it was the wine, or the blow to my head I must have suffered in the shipwreck. Or perhaps Carmilla was right, and the sea had known exactly what she was doing when she brought me to this cursed island. I climbed the left staircase following the sound of laughter, and with each step I felt my old life, my ship, my crew, my simple existence, falling away like a shed skin. The castle swallowed me whole, and somewhere in its depths the brides were smiling. The laughter led me through corridors that seemed to shift and change behind me. Each time I glanced back, the path I'd taken looked different. Doors that hadn't been there before, windows overlooking impossible angles of the courtyard, portraits that I swore had moved from one wall to another. The castle was alive in some fundamental way, breathing around me, rearranging itself like a puzzle that refused to be solved. My ribs still ached with each breath, but the pain had become distant, as if it were happening to someone else. The wine, I told myself. Just the wine making everything soft and strained. But deep down, I knew it was more than that. This place was changing me already, seeping into my blood like poison or prayer. The laughter grew louder, multiplying, until I couldn't tell if it was 3 voices or 30. It echoed off the stone walls, wrapped around me like silk, pulled me forward like a current. I followed it up a spiral staircase so narrow my shoulders brushed both walls, climbing until my legs burned and my lungs screamed for air. At the top, I found a door. It was different from the others I'd passed. Smaller, more intimate, made of dark wood, inlaid with silver in patterns that hurt to look at directly. Symbols that might have been letters in some ancient alphabet, or might have been nothing more than decorative madness. The laughter came from beyond it. Clear now, distinct. 3 voices, I realized. 3 women laughing like they'd just heard the funniest joke in all creation. My hand reached for the door handle before my mind could stop it. The door opened onto a chamber that stole what little breath I had left. It was vast, impossibly so, far larger than the tower could possibly contain. The ceiling arched overhead in Gothic vaults, disappearing into shadows that seemed to move with their own volition. Candles burned everywhere, hundreds of them, their flames reflected in mirrors that lined the walls. But the reflections were wrong. They showed the room from angles that didn't exist, showed me standing in places I wasn't, showed 3 women who cast no reflections at all. The women stood at the far end of the chamber beside a bed so enormous it seemed designed for giants or gods. The bed was draped in crimson velvet and black silk, its 4 posts carved with the same disturbing faces I'd seen on the staircase balustrades. Around it, scattered like offerings, were cushions and furs, golden plates bearing fruit that gleamed too perfectly to be real, and goblets that I knew, without knowing how I knew, were filled with something other than wine. The 3 women turned to look at me, and time itself seemed to stop. Carmilla I already knew, standing on the left in her crimson gown, her blood-red eyes watching me with that mixture of hunger and sorrow. But the other 2, the woman in the center was taller, statuesque, with hair the color of midnight that fell in waves to her waist. She wore a gown of deepest black that seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it, cut low enough to reveal skin as white as marble. Her face was classical beauty incarnate, high cheekbones, full lips, eyes of such pale blue they were almost colorless. She looked like an empress, like a goddess, like something carved from ice and given terrible life. "Katerina," Carmilla said, gesturing to the dark-haired woman, "our eldest sister, first among the brides, touched by the Count's kiss, before either of us drew our first immortal breath." Katerina inclined her head, a gesture that was more queen acknowledging peasant than greeting. "Welcome to our prison, sailor," she said, and her voice was deep and rich, like dark honey poured over broken glass. "You're the first man to set foot here in... How long, Carmilla? 30 years? 40? 53, Carmilla replied softly. "The last one was a missionary, so certain he could save our souls." Her lips curved in a sad smile. "He chose death rather than damnation. His bones are in the courtyard fountain now, keeping the goddess company." The 3rd woman laughed, a sound like wind chimes made of knives. She was smaller than the others, almost delicate, with golden hair that seemed to glow in the candlelight, and eyes of vibrant green that sparkled with mischief and malice in equal measure. Her gown was white, virginal almost, which made the hunger in her expression all the more disturbing. "I'm Lydia," she said, stepping forward with movements that were almost a dance. "The youngest in years, though not in appetite." She circled me slowly, studying me like a cat studies a wounded bird. "He's pretty, this one, stronger than the missionary, less certain of his righteousness. I like that. Righteous men taste bitter when they finally break." "Lydia," Katerina's voice held warning. "Patience." "Patience?" Lydia laughed again, stopping directly in front of me, close enough that I could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her skin. "I've been patient for half a century. We've all been patient. And now God or the devil or the indifferent sea has sent us this gift. And you ask for patience?" She reached up to touch my face, and I flinched back instinctively. Her expression flickered, hurt, then anger, then something that might have been understanding. "You're afraid," she said softly. "Good. You should be. We're monsters, sweet sailor, beautiful, damned, hungry monsters." Her fingers found my chin, tilting my face up to meet her eyes. "But we're also prisoners, trapped here by magic and curse, unable to leave this island, unable to die, unable to do anything but wait and remember what we once were." "What you once were?" I managed to ask, my voice rough. "Before Dracula?" "Before Dracula," Katerina repeated, her voice heavy with memory. "I was a princess. Did you know that? Daughter of a Wallachian voivode, promised to the Count as part of a treaty that was supposed to bring peace to the region." She moved to a window. One of the mirrors shifted, and suddenly I could see her reflection, but it was wrong, showing not the undead creature before me, but a young woman in medieval finery, dark-haired and alive and terrified. "I was 17. I wept on my wedding night, and then he showed me his true nature, sank his teeth into my throat, and I wept no more." The reflection faded, leaving only the cold perfection of what she had become. "I was a merchant's daughter," Carmilla said quietly, her eyes distant. "From Venice. My father owed the Count a debt, money, I think, or perhaps something darker. I was payment. 16 years old, engaged to a boy I'd loved since childhood, planning our life together." Her hand rose unconsciously to her throat, touching a spot just below her jaw. "The Count took me in my bridal dress, drained me to the edge of death, then fed me his blood. When I woke 3 days later, I was no longer human, and I would never see my beloved again." "And I," Lydia said, her voice losing its playful edge, "was a sacrifice, A virgin offered to appease the monster who terrorized my village. 14 years old, crying so hard I couldn't see as they dragged me to his castle. He kept me alive for a week before he turned me. A week of terror, of pain, of learning that there are worse things than death. Her green eyes met mine, and they were ancient, haunted. So yes, sailor, we know what we are. We know what we've lost, and we hate it with every fiber of our damned souls. The chamber fell silent except for the soft whisper of candle flames and my own ragged breathing. I looked at these three women, these beautiful, terrible creatures, and saw past the supernatural allure to the tragedy beneath. They were victims, prisoners, condemned to an eternity they never chose. "I'm sorry," I said and meant it. Katerina's laugh was bitter. "Sorry? What good is sorry? Can your sorrow give us back our mortality? Can it undo the Count's curse, break the magic that binds us to this island, return to us the lives we should have lived?" "No," I admitted, "but I can still feel compassion for your suffering." The three brides exchanged glances, something passing between them that I couldn't interpret. "Compassion," Lydia said slowly, as if testing the word. "I haven't heard that word spoken with sincerity in—" She trailed off, shaking her head. "In longer than I can remember. Most men who wash up here see only the monster," Carmilla said, moving closer. "They see the pale skin, the sharp teeth, the unnatural beauty, and they either run screaming or fall to their knees in terror. Some pray, some beg, some try to fight." Her hand reached out, fingers brushing my cheek with impossible gentleness. "But you see the women beneath the curse, don't you?" "I see people in pain," I said simply. "I see prisoners in a cage they didn't build." "Dangerous words," Katerina warned, but her voice had softened. "Compassion for monsters has broken better men than you." "Perhaps I'm already broken," I replied. "My ship is destroyed. My crew is dead. I'm trapped on an island that shouldn't exist, in a castle full of vampires. What more can be taken from me?" "Your soul," Lydia said bluntly. "Your humanity. Your life eventually. Whether through our bite or through old age while we remain eternally young. Everything you are, everything you might become, all of it can be taken. All of it will be taken, one way or another." "Then why not kill me now?" I asked. "Why the hospitality? Why the food, the wine, whatever this is?" The three women were silent for a long moment. Finally, Carmilla spoke. "Because we're lonely," she said, and the rawness in her voice was like a wound opened fresh. "Because 53 years is a long time to speak to no one but each other, to hear no voice but our own echoes, to touch no warmth but the cold stone of our prison. Because the Count abandoned us here to fade into legend, and we are so very tired of being alone. We want companionship," Katerina added. "Conversation, distraction from the endless march of identical nights. We want to remember what it feels like to be in the presence of someone who still has a heartbeat, still has hope, still has a future. We want you," Lydia finished, and there was no seduction in her voice now, only honesty. "For as long as you last. Whether that's days or weeks or years. We want to pretend, just for a little while, that we're not monsters, that we're still the women we once were." My heart was pounding so hard, I thought it might break through my damaged ribs. Every instinct screamed at me to run, to find a way off this island, to escape before these creatures decided that companionship wasn't enough. But where would I run? Back to the beach? To die of exposure? Into the forest? To be hunted down by whatever beasts Carmilla had mentioned? And beneath the fear, something else stirred. Pity, sadness. A strange, unwelcome empathy for these damned women who had never chosen their fate. "What if," I said slowly, carefully, "what if I stayed? Not as a prisoner, not as prey, but as a guest, for a time, until I can find a way back to the mainland." The three brides stared at me as if I'd spoken in tongues. "You would stay?" Katerina's voice was thick with disbelief. "Willingly?" "I don't have much choice," I pointed out. "But yes, if you promise not to kill me, not to turn me into what you are, then I'll stay. I'll talk with you, keep you company, help you remember your humanity if I can. And if we grow hungry, Lydia asked, her eyes glinting dangerously. If the bloodthirst becomes too strong and your warm veins call to us like siren songs, then I'll trust you to resist, I said, though my voice shook. You've resisted for 53 years. You can resist a while longer. Foolish man, Carmilla whispered. Brave, foolish, compassionate man. Katerina turned away, her shoulders rigid. For a moment, I thought she would reject my offer, would command the others to drain me and be done with it. But when she spoke, her voice was soft. Very well. You may stay as our guest. We will not harm you, not unless you give us cause, or unless you beg for the dark gift yourself. She looked back at me over her shoulder, her pale eyes glittering. But understand this, sailor. Every moment you spend in our presence, you risk your soul. We are creatures of seduction and darkness. We cannot help but tempt, even when we mean no harm. Your compassion may save you, or it may damn you. The choice will be yours to make. I understand, I said, though I wasn't sure I did. Then welcome, Lydia said, and her smile was radiant and terrible, to the eternal night of the Brides of Dracula. They gave me a room in the East Tower, smaller than their chamber but still grander than any place I'd ever slept. A 4-poster bed with clean linens, a wardrobe filled with men's clothing from various centuries, a wash basin with water that somehow remained warm despite sitting in a stone pitcher, and a window that looked out over the black forest and the gray sea beyond. The clothing belonged to previous guests, Carmilla explained as she showed me the room. Some left it behind when they departed. Others had no more need of it after they chose to stay forever. Chose? I asked. The dark gift is always a choice, she said. The Count took that from us, forced his blood upon us without consent. We will not make the same mistake. If any man becomes one of us, it will be because he begged for it, because he chose damnation over mortality with full understanding of what he was accepting. Has anyone ever chosen it? Her expression grew distant. 2. In all the centuries we've been imprisoned here, only 2 men ever begged for the immortal kiss. The first went mad within a decade. The curse affects men differently than women, makes them into mindless beasts. We had to destroy him. The second is still here, somewhere in the lower dungeons, serving as guardian to the island. The Count's magic transformed him into something other, neither man nor vampire, but a creature in between. I thought of the symbols carved in the trees, the piles of stones, the wreath of hair, and dead flowers. What's his name? I asked. He's forgotten it, Carmilla said softly. He's forgotten everything he was. Now he's simply the beast, the guardian, the warning. She moved to the door, pausing on the threshold. Sleep now, if you can. When you wake, we'll have supper prepared. And we'll talk, really talk, about the world outside, about the life you've lived, about everything we've missed in our exile. Carmilla, I called as she started to leave. Thank you. For the room, for the kindness. She turned back, and in the candlelight she looked almost human, almost alive. Thank you, she replied, for seeing us as more than monsters. It's been so very long since anyone has. Then she was gone, the door closing softly behind her, and I was alone in a vampire's castle, on an island that shouldn't exist, having just agreed to stay willingly among the undead. I should have been terrified, should have been planning escape, searching for weapons, looking for a way to signal the mainland. Instead, I found myself moving to the wardrobe, pulling out a dry shirt and breeches that fit reasonably well, changing out of my salt-crusted, blood-stained rags. I should have been praying for salvation. Instead, I found myself wondering what stories the brides would share over supper, what glimpses of their lost humanity I might witness, what small comfort I might offer to creatures who had been denied comfort for so very long. The compassion Carmilla had spoken of. It was already working its way into my heart like a thorn, or perhaps like a seed, waiting to grow into something I couldn't yet name. I lay down on the bed, intending only to rest my eyes for a moment. But exhaustion claimed me immediately, pulling me down into sleep so deep it felt like drowning. And in my dreams, 3 beautiful women wept for the lives they'd lost, while somewhere far below, in the darkness of the castle's foundations, something that was no longer quite human howled at the moon and rattled its chains. The island had claimed another soul. The only question was what I would become before it was finished with me. I woke to the sound of music. It drifted through the stone walls like smoke, melancholy and beautiful. A harpsichord, I thought, though I was no expert in instruments. The melody was old, medieval perhaps, the kind of song that might have been played in courts centuries before I was born. It wrapped around me as I opened my eyes, pulling me from dreams of drowning into the strange reality of my situation. The room was darker now. Through the window I could see that night had fallen, true night, deep and absolute, with stars scattered across the sky like diamonds on black velvet. A full moon hung low on the horizon, enormous and silver, casting its light across the island in shades of gray and shadow. How long had I slept? Hours, days. Time felt different here, elastic and uncertain. I rose from the bed, my ribs protesting but not screaming as they had before. Someone had left fresh water in the basin, a towel beside it, and when I washed my face, I found a razor and soap as well. Antique, certainly, but functional. I shaved carefully, studying my reflection in the small mirror above the basin. I looked different, older perhaps, or simply more worn. My eyes had dark circles beneath them, and there was a new hardness in my expression that hadn't been there before the shipwreck. The sea had always aged men quickly, but this was something else. This was the look of someone who had seen beyond the veil of the ordinary world and couldn't unsee it. The music continued, patient and persistent, and I understood it was a summons. I dressed in the clothes from the wardrobe, black breeches, a white shirt with ruffles at the cuffs, a deep burgundy waistcoat embroidered with silver thread. The clothing of a gentleman from another century, but it fit well enough, and it was certainly finer than anything I'd owned in my life as a sailor. When I looked in the mirror again, I barely recognized myself. The music led me back through the shifting corridors of the castle, down the spiral staircase, through halls I didn't remember from my ascent. But this time, I noticed details I'd missed before. Paintings that depicted not portraits, but scenes. Battles, coronations, executions, all rendered in disturbing detail. Tapestries showing hunts where the prey was clearly human. Suits of armor standing in alcoves, their helmets turned to follow my passage. The castle was watching me. I could feel its attention like a physical weight. I followed the music to a dining hall that stole my breath. It was vast, Gothic, magnificent. A vaulted ceiling stretched overhead, painted with frescoes of heaven and hell locked in eternal war. Stained glass windows lined one wall, though what light they might have let in during the day was now replaced by moonlight that turned their biblical scenes into something eerie and beautiful. A table long enough to seat 50 dominated the center of the room, covered in white linen and set with silver and crystal that gleamed in the light of 100 candles. But only 4 places were set, 1 at the head of the table, 3 along the sides. Katerina sat at the head, regal as a queen on a throne. She had changed from her black gown into something even more striking, deep purple velvet with a high collar and long sleeves, her midnight hair piled atop her head and secured with silver pins. She looked like an empress from a Byzantine mosaic, beautiful and terrifying and utterly inhuman. Carmilla sat to her right, wearing a gown of dark blue that made her pale skin seem to glow. Her hair was unbound, falling in soft waves around her shoulders, and she wore no jewelry except for a small silver cross, inverted, hanging at her throat. When she saw me, she smiled, and there was genuine warmth in it. Lydia sat opposite Carmilla, and she had abandoned her white gown for something far more scandalous, crimson silk that left her shoulders bare and clung to her small frame like a second skin. Her golden hair was braided with red ribbons, and her green eyes sparkled with mischief as I entered. "Our guest awakens," she said, her voice light and teasing. "We were beginning to think you'd sleep through the entire night." "You slept for 14 hours, Katerina informed me, gesturing to the empty chair at the far end of the table, opposite her. "The exhaustion and injury took their toll. But you're here now. Please sit." I walked the length of the table, acutely aware of 3 pairs of unblinking eyes following my every movement. The harpsichord music came from the corner, where an instrument played itself, its keys moving without any visible performer. I tried not to stare. "Don't mind the music," Carmilla said as I sat. "The castle has its own way of providing entertainment. The Count enchanted many things before he left us here." The table before me was set with fine china, crystal wine glasses, silver cutlery. But there was no food on my plate, no wine in my glass. As if reading my mind, and perhaps she could, Lydia laughed. "Patience, sweet sailor. Supper will be served shortly. We wanted to wait for you to join us properly." Katerina clapped her hands once, and the sound echoed through the hall like thunder. From a side door I hadn't noticed, a figure emerged carrying a silver tray. My breath caught in my throat. It was a man, or had been once. He was tall, skeletal thin, his skin gray as ash and stretched tight over prominent bones. He wore the livery of a servant from centuries past, immaculately maintained but clearly ancient. His eyes were clouded white, seeing nothing, and he moved with the mechanical precision of a puppet on strings. "This is Boris," Carmilla explained softly. "He was the castle's steward when we first arrived. He died of old age nearly 200 years ago, but the castle keeps him, animates him, uses him as it needs. He feels nothing, knows nothing. He's simply a function of the enchantment that binds this place." I watched in horrified fascination as Boris set a silver dome-covered plate before me, then moved to fill my wine glass with deep red liquid from a crystal decanter. When he lifted the dome, steam rose from the plate beneath. Roasted meat, vegetables, bread still warm from the oven. Food that smelled so delicious my mouth watered despite my revulsion at the dead servant who had brought it. Boris served the three brides as well, but their plates were different. Each received a single crystal goblet filled with dark liquid that I knew, even without asking, was not wine. "Don't worry," Lydia said, noticing my expression. "It's not human. We keep livestock in the lower levels, goats, pigs, the occasional deer that swims to the island. The Count provided for our needs before he abandoned us. We drink what we must to survive, but we're not monsters who prey on innocents." "Not anymore," Katerina added, her voice heavy with old guilt. "Not for a very long time." Boris retreated silently, leaving us alone in the vast hall. I stared at my plate, my appetite warring with my unease. "Eat," Carmilla urged gently. "The food is real, untainted. We wouldn't poison or enchant what we offer in hospitality." I picked up my fork and knife, cut a piece of the meat, brought it to my mouth. It was delicious, rich, and perfectly seasoned. Better than anything I'd eaten in my life, but it felt wrong, sharing a meal with three vampires while a dead man served us, and a castle played music to itself. "You have questions," Katerina observed. "I can see them burning in your eyes. Ask them. This is what you're here for. Conversation, companionship. We won't be offended by curiosity." I swallowed, set down my fork. "How long have you been here? On this island?" "I arrived in 1492, Katerina said. "The year your Christopher Columbus sailed to the New World. I watched from this very castle as history changed, as the medieval world died and modernity was born, and I remained frozen in time, unchanged and unchanging. I came in 1587, Carmilla added, "the year the English executed Mary, Queen of Scots. I was brought to the Count as tribute, transformed, and abandoned here within a single month. And I," Lydia said, her playful demeanor fading, "arrived in 1721. I've been here the shortest time, only 304 years. 304 years. The number was incomprehensible. "And the Count?" I asked. "Dracula himself? When did he leave you?" The three women exchanged glances, some silent communication passing between them. "Approximately 200 years ago," Katerina finally answered. "He visited less and less frequently as the decades passed. At first he came monthly, then yearly, then only when the mood struck him. The last time he walked these halls was in 1824. He said we reminded him too much of his lost love, his Elisabetta, who died centuries before we were born. He said we were beautiful cages he'd built for a bird that would never return, and that he could no longer bear to look at us. So he bound us here," Carmilla continued, her voice barely above a whisper. "With spells and blood magic. We cannot leave the island. We cannot die. We cannot even sleep. Not truly. We exist in a perpetual twilight, aware of every moment of every night. Forever. That's why the missionary chose death, Lydia said, staring into her goblet, when he understood that if we turned him, he would share our fate, eternal imprisonment, eternal awareness, no escape even in unconsciousness. He begged us to kill him instead, and we did, mercifully, quickly. I felt a chill that had nothing to do with the temperature of the room. You can't sleep? Never, Katerina confirmed. In 533 years, I have not slept once. I remember every night, every hour, every moment. I can tell you what I was doing on any specific date in the last half-millennium. It's a special kind of torture. Consciousness without respite, memory without the mercy of forgetting. God, I breathed. God abandoned us long ago, Carmilla said softly. If he ever knew we existed at all. We fell into silence. I forced myself to eat, though the food had lost its taste. The three brides sipped from their goblets, and I tried not to think about what they contained, tried not to imagine them hunting in the forests, draining terrified animals to satisfy the hunger that would never truly fade. Tell us about your life, Lydia said suddenly, breaking the oppressive quiet. Before the shipwreck, tell us about the world outside. My life? I almost laughed. It's nothing compared to yours. I'm nobody. A sailor, a working man. I've never been to court, never known nobility, never— Tell us anyway, Carmilla interrupted. Please. We've been nobility and peasants, princesses and sacrifices. What we haven't been in centuries is ordinary. We want to hear about ordinary things. Simple things, real things. So I told them. I told them about growing up in a port town in England, the son of a cooper who made barrels for ships. I told them about running away to sea at 14, working my way up from cabin boy to able seaman to navigator. I told them about storms and calms, ports and oceans, the camaraderie of sailors and the loneliness of long voyages. I told them about a girl I'd loved once, briefly, who married a merchant while I was at sea and never wrote to tell me. I told them about the time I'd nearly died of fever in the Caribbean, saved by a ship's surgeon who taught me to read and write. I told them about witnessing a battle between a British frigate and a French privateer, the horror and the glory of it, the way men screamed when the cannons fired. And they listened, truly listened, with an intensity that was almost frightening. Katerina leaned forward, her pale eyes fixed on my face, drinking in every word. Carmilla smiled at the happy parts, frowned at the sad ones, reacted as if she were living these moments herself. Lydia asked questions about the ships, the navigation, the exotic ports I'd visited, her green eyes bright with curiosity. For hours we sat there. My food grew cold, forgotten. Their goblets emptied and Boris appeared silently to refill them. The harpsichord played on, a gentle background to my stories, and the candles burned without seeming to grow shorter. You've lived more in your years than we have in our centuries, Katerina said when I finally fell silent. We've been trapped in one place, one moment, forever. But you've seen the world, experienced it, changed with it. That's a kind of immortality we'll never know. I'd trade places with you in a heartbeat, I said without thinking, then immediately regretted it as 3 pairs of eyes fixed on me with sudden intensity. Would you? Lydia asked softly. Would you truly? Eternal youth, eternal beauty, power beyond mortal comprehension, but also eternal imprisonment, eternal hunger, eternal awareness of every moment stretching into infinity? No, I admitted. No, I wouldn't. I'm sorry. That was thoughtless. Don't apologize, Carmilla said. We understand the appeal. We felt it once, when the Count first offered us his blood. Immortality seems like such a gift until you realize it's a curse that never ends. Could you? I hesitated, unsure if I should ask. Could you be freed? Is there any way to break the curse, to let you leave the island or die, if that's what you wanted? Katerina's expression hardened. We've searched for centuries, read every book in the castle's library, attempted every counter spell we could devise. The Count's magic is ancient, powerful, and specifically designed to be unbreakable. Only he could undo what he's done. And he'll never return, Lydia added bitterly. He's moved on to new obsessions, new companions, new attempts to resurrect his precious Elisabetta. We're forgotten footnotes in his long existence. Then you're truly alone here. I said quietly. Until now, Carmilla replied, and her smile was sad and grateful and something else I couldn't name. Until the sea brought you to us. The weight of her words settled over me like a shroud. I was their entertainment, their connection to the world beyond, their reminder that life still existed outside their prison. And when I died, whether of old age or accident or their hunger overcoming their control, they would return to their eternal loneliness, waiting decades or centuries for the next soul to wash up on their cursed shore. I won't live forever, I said, voicing the thought aloud. You know that. Even if I stay, even if I keep you company for years, eventually I'll grow old and die, and you'll still be here. We know, Katerina said. We've always known. But even a few years of companionship is precious when you measure time in centuries. And perhaps, Lydia said, her voice dropping to barely a whisper, perhaps you'll choose to stay forever, as we have. The dark gift is always available, sweet sailor. All you have to do is ask. The temptation in her words was palpable, seductive, terrifying. I could feel it pulling at me, making me imagine what it would be like. Never aging, never dying, never leaving these beautiful damned women to their loneliness. But I also felt the trap in it, the slow erosion of will that would come from spending too much time in their presence. I won't ask, I said firmly. I won't choose damnation, no matter how lonely you are. Instead of anger, I saw respect flicker in Katerina's eyes. Good. Hold to that resolve. It will serve you well here. The conversation turned lighter after that. They asked about modern ships, modern politics, the state of the world beyond their island. I told them what I knew, which wasn't much, for I was a simple sailor, not a scholar. But they savored every detail like starving people given bread. We talked until the candles had burned low and the harpsichord had cycled through its repertoire 3 times. We talked until exhaustion began to creep up on me again, my eyes growing heavy despite my fascination with their stories. You should rest, Carmilla finally said, rising from her seat. We've kept you too long. Boris will show you back to your room. The dead servant appeared as if summoned, his clouded eyes seeing nothing, his gray hand gesturing toward the door. Thank you, I said, standing. For the meal, for the conversation, for treating me as a guest rather than prey. Thank you, Katerina replied, for seeing us as women rather than monsters. It's a gift we don't take lightly. I followed Boris through the dark corridors, but at the base of the spiral staircase, I paused. A thought had been growing in my mind throughout the evening, a question I needed answered. Boris, I said, even though I knew he couldn't hear, couldn't understand. The guardian in the dungeons, the man who became a beast. What was his name? I didn't expect an answer. But as if the castle itself responded, a word whispered through the stones, echoing up from the depths below. Thomas. The name hung in the air like a curse, and somewhere far beneath my feet, in the darkness of the dungeons, something howled, a sound of rage and sorrow and hunger that made my blood run cold. Boris continued up the stairs as if nothing had happened, but I stood frozen, listening to that terrible cry fade into silence, and understanding with absolute certainty that I had just heard my future, what I would become if I stayed too long, loved too deeply, or asked for the dark gift that the brides would give so willingly. Thomas had been a man once, a guest, perhaps even a companion. Now he was something else entirely, and the island was patient. It could wait. Days blurred into nights, and nights into something beyond time itself. I fell into a routine that would have seemed impossible during my first hours on the island. I woke, or rather rose, for true sleep remained elusive in that cursed place, and found fresh clothing laid out, warm water in the basin, food waiting on a tray outside my door. I explored the castle during the day, while the brides retreated to whatever dark chambers they occupied during the sunlit hours. And when night fell, I joined them for supper, for conversation, for the strange companionship that was becoming less strange with each passing evening. The castle revealed itself to me slowly, like a woman removing veils one at a time. I discovered a library that stretched 3 stories high, filled with books in languages I couldn't read, and some I could. ancient tomes on alchemy, theology, dark magic, alongside volumes of poetry, philosophy, and history. I found an armory filled with weapons from a dozen different centuries, all perfectly maintained, all utterly useless against the supernatural forces that held this place. I wandered through galleries hung with paintings of people long dead, through chapels where the crucifixes had been turned upside down, through gardens where nothing grew except pale flowers that bloomed only by moonlight, and everywhere I felt the castle watching me. On the fifth night, or was it the sixth, time had become elastic, unreliable. I asked the question that had been burning in my mind since I arrived. We were in the music room, a circular chamber in the western tower where instruments from across the centuries stood silent and waiting. Carmilla sat at the harpsichord, playing a melancholy piece I didn't recognize. Lydia lounged on a velvet chaise, reading a book of French poetry. Katerina stood at the window, staring out at the moonlit sea with an expression of infinite longing. "The guardian," I said, breaking the comfortable silence. "Thomas, tell me about him." The music stopped abruptly. Carmilla's hands froze above the keys. Lydia's book slipped from her fingers. Katerina turned from the window, her pale eyes sharp as knives. "Why do you want to know?" Katerina's voice was cold, wary. "Because I heard him," I replied honestly, "that first night. And I need to understand what happens to men who stay here, what I'm risking by remaining." The three brides exchanged glances. Some silent conversation passed between them, too quick for me to follow. Finally, Carmilla spoke. "Thomas was a priest," she said softly. "A young Jesuit who shipwrecked here in 1798. He came to save our souls, to exorcise the demons he believed possessed us." Her lips curved in a bitter smile. "He didn't understand that we are the demons, not merely vessels for them. He was beautiful," Lydia added, her voice distant with memory. "Not in body, he was quite plain, actually, but in spirit, he had such faith, such certainty in God's love and mercy. He prayed for us constantly, fasted on our behalf, begged heaven to release us from our curse. And we loved him for it," Katerina said, moving away from the window. "All three of us. Differently, perhaps, but deeply. He stayed for 2 years, living among us, ministering to our spiritual needs even as we fed his body and shared his company. He never judged us, never condemned us. He simply loved us as Christ commanded and tried to lead us back to grace." "What happened?" I asked, though I already suspected the answer. "He fell in love," Carmilla said simply. "With me, specifically, though he cared for all of us. And She paused, her composure cracking for just a moment. "I loved him as well, as much as a damned creature can love. And one night, after too much wine and too many confessions, I offered him what he had never asked for, the dark gift, eternity with us, freedom from mortality and its pains. He refused," Lydia continued, "said he would rather die and face judgment than abandon his soul to damnation. But then I made a mistake, a terrible, unforgivable mistake." Her green eyes were haunted. "I told him the truth, that we were planning to let him leave, that we had been working for months on a spell to temporarily weaken the Count's magic, just enough to allow a mortal to escape the island, that he could go back to the world, return to his mission, live out his natural life. And he asked to stay anyway," Katerina finished. "Not as a mortal, but as one of us, because he couldn't bear the thought of leaving us to our eternal loneliness, because his love was greater than his fear of damnation." The weight of their words settled over the room like a shroud. "We should have refused," Carmilla whispered. "We should have forced him to leave, pushed him onto the boat we'd prepared, saved him from himself. But we were selfish, lonely, desperate for companionship that wouldn't end. So we gave him what he asked for. The transformation took 3 days," Lydia said, her voice hollow, "as it always does. He died in agony, calling out to God, begging for forgiveness even as our blood remade him. And when he rose on the 3rd night," she trailed off, shaking her head. "He wasn't Thomas anymore," Katerina said flatly. "The curse affects men differently than women. Where we retained our minds, our personalities, our humanity, such as it is, he became something else. A beast, all hunger and rage and animal instinct. He tried to kill us." Would have succeeded perhaps if the Count's magic hadn't intervened. The castle took him, Carmilla explained, dragged him down into the deepest dungeons, bound him with chains and spells, transformed him further into something that serves as guardian to the island, preventing anyone from leaving who hasn't been given permission. He's been down there for 227 years now. Sometimes we hear him howling, sometimes we hear him weeping, sometimes we hear him praying in a voice that's barely human anymore. And you never tried to free him? I asked. To end his suffering? We can't, Katerina said, and for the first time I heard genuine anguish in her voice. The Count's magic won't allow it. Thomas is bound to the island as surely as we are, but in a different way. He's the warning, the punishment, the reminder of what happens when mortals accept the dark gift without understanding the full price. Do you visit him? The question came out before I could stop it. Carmilla's eyes filled with tears, real tears, though they didn't fall. The undead couldn't weep properly, I'd learned. Their eyes could shine with sorrow, but no water would ever spill down those perfect cheeks. Once a month, she admitted. I go down to the dungeons and sit outside his cell and talk to him. Tell him about the world above, about the books I've read, about the stars and the sea. Sometimes he's lucid enough to understand. Sometimes he just howls and rattles his chains. But I go anyway, because I loved him once, and love, even damned love, requires faithfulness. The room fell silent. The weight of Thomas's tragedy pressed down on us all. Is that why you warned me? I asked quietly. Why you said I should never ask for the dark gift? Yes, Katerina said. We won't make that mistake again. We won't transform another man, no matter how much we might want to, no matter how lonely we become. Thomas was our last victim, and we swore on his suffering that there would never be another. But I could still become like him, I said, understanding dawning. If I stay too long, if I fall in love with one of you, if I start to forget that I'm mortal and you're not. Yes, Lydia confirmed. The island has its own magic, separate from the Count's but just as powerful. It feeds on desire, on longing, on the wish to belong. The longer you stay, the more it will seem natural to remain forever. Your resolve will weaken. Your mortality will seem like a burden rather than a blessing. And one day, you'll beg us for the gift we've sworn never to give again. And if you refuse, I asked, then you'll waste away, Carmilla said softly, growing older, weaker, watching us remain eternally young, eventually dying of heartbreak or despair or simple old age, having spent your entire life in a prison that was never meant for you. And if I try to leave, Thomas will stop you, Katerina said bluntly. That's his purpose. He prevents anyone from escaping the island unless we release them. And we can only release someone if we're certain they'll never speak of this place, never try to return, never send others to rescue us. Could you release me? I asked. If I wanted to go? The three brides looked at each other. Finally, Carmilla nodded. Yes, if you asked to leave right now, tonight, we would take you to the cove where a boat is kept. We would provision you, give you charts, release you from the island's hold. You would sail away and return to the mainland, and we would never see you again. But you would remember us, Lydia added, and we would remember you. For the rest of your mortal life, you would carry the knowledge of what exists here. And for the rest of our immortal existence, we would regret letting you go. I stood there, torn between fear and fascination, between the desire to flee and the growing attachment to these damned women who had shown me nothing but kindness and honesty. I'm not ready to leave, I heard myself say. Not yet. Then you're a fool, Katerina said, but there was warmth in her voice. A brave, compassionate, beautiful fool. That night I couldn't rest. I lay in my bed, staring at the ceiling, thinking about Thomas in his dungeon cell, about the choice he'd made and the price he'd paid. I thought about the brides, trapped in their eternal prison, loving and losing and remaining forever unchanged. I thought about my own mortality, the fragility of it, the precious brevity that the undead could never know. And I made a decision. I rose, dressed, and left my room. The castle was dark except for moonlight streaming through the windows, painting everything in silver and shadow. I walked through the corridors I'd come to know, down staircases I'd memorized, following a path I'd never taken before. Down, always down, past the ground floor, past the cellars where the brides kept their livestock, past storage rooms filled with ancient furniture and forgotten treasures, down to levels that hadn't seen sunlight in centuries, where the air grew cold and damp and smelled of stone and despair. I was looking for the dungeons, for Thomas, for the truth of what I was risking. The castle didn't stop me. If anything, it seemed to guide me, opening doors I touched, lighting torches as I passed, showing me the way to its darkest heart. Finally, I reached a corridor lined with iron doors. Each had a small barred window at eye level. Most of the cells stood empty, their doors hanging open, their interiors dark and abandoned. But at the very end of the corridor, one door was closed, and from behind it came sounds that made my blood run cold. Breathing, heavy, animal breathing. The rattle of chains. A low growl that might have been a word or might have been nothing more than a beast's warning. I approached slowly, my heart hammering, every instinct screaming at me to run. But I had to see, had to know. I reached the door and looked through the barred window. The cell beyond was small, barely 10 feet square. Chains hung from the walls, thick as a man's wrist, covered in symbols that glowed faintly in the darkness. And in the center of the cell, held by those chains, was something that had once been human. Thomas was enormous, 7 feet tall at least, his body twisted and changed by dark magic. His skin was gray, covered in coarse hair that might have been fur. His hands ended in claws that scraped against the stone floor. His face was a nightmare, elongated like a wolf's, with yellow eyes that glowed in the darkness and teeth that were far too sharp, far too numerous. But the worst part was his expression, because beneath the beast I could still see the man. In those yellow eyes there was intelligence, pain, recognition. He saw me looking at him, and he went very still. "Thomas?" I whispered. The creature's eyes widened. His mouth opened, and a sound came out. Part growl, part sob, part word. Run! The voice was barely recognizable as human, torn and ruined by centuries of howling. But the intent was clear. He was warning me. Even as a monster, even damned and transformed and imprisoned, he was trying to save me from his fate. "I'm sorry," I said, tears streaming down my face. "I'm so sorry this happened to you." "Don't stay," Thomas forced out, each word an agony. "Leave before you become—" He couldn't finish the sentence. His body convulsed, the beast overwhelming the man again, and he threw himself against the chains with such force that the entire wall shook. His howl was pure animal fury, echoing through the dungeons, a sound of rage and grief and eternal suffering. I stumbled backward, my hands shaking, my breath coming in gasps. This was the price of loving the brides. This was what awaited any man who stayed too long, wanted too much, asked for the wrong gift. I turned and ran, racing back through the corridors, up the stairs, fleeing from the truth I'd sought and found. But even as I ran, I knew it was already too late, because I understood now why Thomas had made his choice. I'd seen it in the bride's eyes over these past days, the loneliness, the longing, the desperate need for companionship in their eternal night. And I'd felt my own heart responding, softening, beginning to care for them in ways that terrified me. I was already falling. The only question was whether I would have the strength to leave before I fell too far. When I reached my room, I found Carmilla waiting for me, sitting on my bed with her hands folded in her lap. "You went to see him," she said quietly. It wasn't a question. "Yes, and now you understand." "Yes." She stood, crossed to where I stood trembling in the doorway. Her hand reached up to touch my face, and her fingers were cold but gentle. "Will you leave?" she asked, and her voice was small, vulnerable, nothing like the composed vampire I'd come to know. "Will you ask us to release you?" I looked into her blood-red eyes and saw the woman beneath the monster, the 16-year-old girl stolen from her betrothed, transformed against her will, condemned to centuries of loneliness. "Not yet," I whispered, "but soon, before I become what he became." "How long?" Her hand was still on my face, and I could feel myself leaning into her touch despite knowing the danger. "I don't know. Weeks, perhaps. Maybe a month. Long enough to help you remember your humanity." Not long enough to forget my own. She smiled, sad and grateful and heartbreaking. Thank you for staying, for caring, for seeing us as worth saving, even though we're damned beyond redemption. You're not beyond redemption, I said, believing it with everything I had. You're victims, prisoners. You never chose this. Neither did Thomas, she reminded me. But he's damned all the same. She left then, slipping out of my room like a ghost, leaving me alone with my fear and my resolve and the terrible knowledge of what lay waiting in the dungeons below. I didn't sleep that night. Instead, I sat at the window, watching the moon track across the sky, counting the hours until dawn would bring me another day of borrowed time. Another day closer to the choice that would damn me or save me. And somewhere far below, Thomas howled at the moon he could no longer see, warning away the man who couldn't hear him anymore. 3 weeks had passed since I'd descended into the dungeons and seen what remained of Thomas. 3 weeks of conversations that stretched through the night, of laughter and sorrow shared equally, of growing attachment that terrified me even as it filled the hollow places in my heart. The brides had become more than my captors or my companions. They had become something dangerously close to family. Katerina taught me to play chess on a board of ivory and ebony, pieces carved in the shapes of medieval warriors and nobles. She was merciless in victory, gracious in the rare defeats I managed through luck rather than skill. But more than the game, I learned to read the subtle shifts in her expression, the way centuries of loneliness had built walls around her heart that were only now beginning to crack. Lydia showed me the castle's hidden passages, the secret rooms that even the enchantment couldn't fully control. We explored together like children, finding forgotten treasures and ancient horrors in equal measure. She laughed easily, touched freely, and in her green eyes I saw the 14-year-old girl who had been dragged screaming to her transformation, now hiding behind centuries of forced cheerfulness. And Carmilla. Carmilla and I talked, hour after hour, night after night, sitting in the library or walking the battlements under the stars. We shared our souls in ways I'd never done with any living person. She told me about her lost love, the boy she'd planned to marry, the life she'd imagined before it was stolen. I told her about the loneliness of the sea, the way a man could be surrounded by crew and still feel utterly alone, the hunger for connection that had driven me from port to port searching for something I couldn't name. We never touched beyond the occasional brush of hands. We never spoke of love or desire or the future. But the connection between us grew deeper with each passing night, and I knew, we both knew, that I was running out of time. On the 21st night, as we sat together in the music room while Katerina played a haunting melody on the violin, Carmilla finally asked the question I'd been dreading. "When will you leave?" The music stopped. Lydia looked up from her book. All 3 brides fixed their eyes on me, waiting. "Soon," I said, the word catching in my throat. "I can feel it. The island's pull, the temptation to stay forever. If I wait much longer, you'll become like Thomas," Katerina finished softly. "We know. We can see it happening." "How?" I asked. "The way you look at us," Lydia said. "The way you linger when we say goodnight. The way you've stopped asking about the mainland, about escape, about the world beyond our shores." She was right. I'd been so focused on understanding the brides, on helping them remember their humanity, that I'd been forgetting my own. The mortal world had begun to seem distant, unreal, less important than the eternal night I'd found here. "Tomorrow," I said, forcing the words out. "I'll leave tomorrow night." The pain that flashed across their faces was like a knife to my heart. "So soon?" Carmilla whispered. "It has to be," I replied, "before I lose the will to go at all." Katerina set down her violin with infinite care. "Then tomorrow we will prepare the boat. We will provision it, chart your course, release you from the island's hold." Her voice was steady, but her pale eyes shone with unshed tears. "And we will never see you again." "I'm sorry," I said, inadequate words for an impossible situation. I wish things were different." "So do we," Lydia said, her playful mask finally cracking to reveal the sorrow beneath. "But they're not. You're mortal. We're damned. And love, any kind of love, between the living and the dead can only end in tragedy." "Is that what this is?" I asked quietly. "Love?" The 3 brides looked at each other. Some silent conversation passed between them, centuries of shared existence allowing communication beyond words. Finally, Carmilla spoke. "Yes," she said simply. "In whatever way creatures like us can love, we love you, all three of us, differently but equally. You've given us something we thought we'd lost forever. Hope. The hope that we're still capable of caring for someone beyond ourselves, that we haven't been completely consumed by the curse. And you've given us a reason to remember why immortality is a curse," Katerina added. "Because we'll lose you, either to death if you stay and age, or to distance if you leave. Either way, we lose you, and we'll remember that loss forever. But we'd rather lose you to life than to damnation," Lydia finished. "That's how we know we still have some shred of humanity left." The music room fell silent. Outside the windows, the moon hung full and bright, painting the castle in silver light. Somewhere in the depths below, Thomas howled his eternal warning. "One last night," Carmilla said, standing. "Let us have one last night together. No talk of leaving, no sorrow, no regrets. Just companionship, as it's been these past weeks." "One last night," I agreed. "We spent that final night as we'd spent so many others, talking, laughing, sharing stories and silences in equal measure. But there was a bittersweet quality to it all, a sense of ending that colored everything beautiful with shades of sorrow." Katerina played every instrument in the music room, a private concert that would have made angels weep. Lydia read poetry in languages I didn't understand, her voice making music of words I couldn't comprehend. And Carmilla sat beside me, her hand occasionally brushing mine, her presence a comfort and a torment. As the night deepened toward dawn, we made our way to the battlements, the highest point of the castle, where the wind blew cold and clean and the stars seemed close enough to touch. "I used to come here every night," Katerina said, looking out over the dark island and the darker sea beyond. "In the early years, I would stand here and watch for ships, praying that someone would come, that the Count would return, that anything would change." She smiled sadly. "Eventually I stopped, accepted that nothing would ever change. And then you arrived. Do you think the sea sent me deliberately?" I asked. "Or was it just chance?" "Does it matter?" Lydia replied. "You're here. That's all that counts." We stood in silence, the four of us, watching the stars wheel overhead. And for just a moment, I let myself imagine a different ending, one where I stayed, where I found a way to break the curse, where the brides and I could walk in daylight together, free from the island and its dark magic. But fairy tales don't come true for the damned. And I was still mortal enough to know the difference between fantasy and reality. "I need to tell you something," Carmilla said suddenly. "All of you. Before he leaves. Before it's too late." Katerina and Lydia turned to look at her, surprise evident on their faces. "I went to see Thomas," Carmilla continued. 2 nights ago, while you all slept. I told him about our guest, about the man who saw us as more than monsters. And he was lucid for just a moment. Lucid enough to give me a message." "What message?" I asked, my heart hammering. She reached into the folds of her gown and pulled out something small, wrapped in silk. When she unwrapped it, I saw a ring, simple silver, tarnished with age, with a small inscription inside that I couldn't read in the moonlight. "This was Thomas's," she explained. "His priesthood ring. He told me to give it to you, said to tell you that faith isn't about never doubting, never fearing, never being tempted. Faith is about choosing grace even when damnation seems easier, choosing life even when death seems kinder, choosing to leave even when staying feels like love." She pressed the ring into my hand, and her fingers were cold, but her touch was gentle. "He wants you to escape what he couldn't," she finished. "He wants you to be strong enough to walk away." I looked down at the ring, this tiny piece of silver that represented everything Thomas had been and everything he'd lost. And I understood that I was being given a choice, not just by the brides, but by the island itself, by fate or God or whatever force had brought me here. Stay and risk damnation for the sake of love, or leave and embrace the loneliness that comes with choosing life over darkness. "I'll take it," I said, slipping the ring onto my finger. It fit perfectly. "I'll carry his faith with me, and I'll remember all of you, not as monsters, but as the women you were before the curse, the women you still are, underneath everything, Will you think of us kindly? Lydia asked, her voice small and vulnerable. When you're old and gray, sailing distant seas, will you remember us with affection? Or will we become the nightmare that haunted your youth? I'll remember you with love, I promised, and with sorrow that I couldn't save you, but never with fear, never with regret. Katerina turned away, her shoulders shaking with sobs that produced no tears. Lydia buried her face in her hands. And Carmilla? Carmilla stepped close to me, so close I could feel the unnatural cold radiating from her skin. She reached up and touched my face, her palm resting against my cheek. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing us, for staying long enough to remind us that we're still capable of love, even if we're not capable of redemption. You'll never know what that gift means to us. I think I do, I replied, covering her hand with mine, because you've given me the same gift. You've shown me that compassion doesn't require understanding, that humanity exists even in the damned, that love can bloom in the darkest places. We stood like that for a long moment, mortal and immortal, alive and undead, sharing a connection that transcended the curse that separated us. And then the sky began to lighten in the east. Dawn was coming. We have to go, Katerina said urgently. The sun will rise soon. We need to get you to the boat. They led me through the castle one last time, down corridors I'd memorized and through doors I'd never noticed. We descended to a level below even the dungeons, where the stone walls were damp with sea spray and the sound of waves echoed through hidden passages. The cove was small, hidden, accessible only through a cave that opened onto the eastern shore of the island. A boat waited there, small but sturdy, provisioned with food, water, charts, and supplies. The magic will release you once you're beyond the reef, Katerina explained, pointing to where waves broke white against submerged rocks. After that, the currents will carry you toward the mainland. 3 days of sailing, perhaps 4. You'll reach the coast of Transylvania near the town of Constanza. And you'll forget us, Lydia added. Not completely. You'll remember us like a dream, beautiful and distant. The island's magic will fade, and will become a story you're not quite sure you believe. No, I said firmly. I won't forget. I'll fight to remember every moment, every conversation, every truth you've shared. You deserve to be remembered. Foolish man, Carmilla said, but she was smiling through her sorrow. Brave, foolish, beautiful man. I loaded my meager belongings into the boat, the clothes I'd arrived in, now cleaned and mended, and Thomas's ring, which I'd transferred to a leather cord around my neck. I had nothing else. Everything I'd gained on this island was intangible, invisible, written on my heart, rather than carried in my hands. The 3 brides stood at the edge of the water, silhouetted against the growing dawn. They couldn't come further. The sun was rising, and even the diffused light through the cave entrance was making them retreat into shadow. Go, Katerina commanded, before we lose our resolve and beg you to stay. I climbed into the boat, took up the oars, looked back at the 3 beautiful, damned women who had changed my life forever. I won't say goodbye, I told them, because that makes it feel permanent. Instead, I'll say, may you find peace, may you find freedom. May you find a way to break the curse and reclaim the lives that were stolen from you. And may you find happiness, Carmilla replied. May you sail safe waters. May you love freely and live fully and die peacefully when your time comes. May you have everything we can never have. Remember us, Lydia whispered. Please, remember that we were real. Always, I promised. And then I pushed away from the shore, rowing toward the cave entrance, toward the light, toward the mortal world I'd almost lost forever. I looked back once, just once, and saw them standing there. Katerina tall and regal, Lydia small and fierce, Carmilla beautiful and broken. 3 women who had been princesses and sacrifices and victims, now condemned to an eternity of darkness and loneliness. But they were smiling. Despite everything, despite the pain of parting, they were smiling, because I had reminded them that they were still capable of love. And love, even damned love, is worth the price of sorrow. The sun rose as I cleared the reef, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold that I'd almost forgotten existed. The island fell away behind me, shrinking to a dark speck on the horizon, and then to nothing at all. For 3 days I sailed, eating the provisions the brides had packed, navigating by the charts they'd provided, fighting exhaustion and doubt in equal measure. The sea was kind, kinder than she'd been during the storm, and the winds blew steady and true. On the 4th day I saw the coast of Transylvania rising from the morning mist. On the 5th day I stepped onto solid ground in Constanza, surrounded by people and noise and the overwhelming reality of the mortal world. And as Lydia had predicted, the memories began to fade. Not completely, never completely, but they softened, became dreamlike, lost their sharp edges of terror and wonder. The island became a story I'd heard rather than lived. The brides became figures from legend rather than women I'd known and loved. But Thomas's ring remained solid and real around my neck, cold against my skin, a reminder that some things had truly happened. 20 years have passed since that October when my ship went down in a storm off the Transylvanian coast. I'm older now, gray-haired and weathered, captain of my own vessel. I've sailed to ports I'd only dreamed of as a young man. I've married, had children, built a life that's full and rich and ordinary in the best possible way. But sometimes, on nights when the moon is full and the sea is calm, I stand at the ship's rail and look toward the eastern horizon. And I remember 3 women in a castle on an island that doesn't appear on any map. I remember their stories, their sorrow, their humanity burning bright beneath the curse that consumed them. I wonder if they think of me, if in their eternal night, they remember the mortal man who saw them as more than monsters. If my memory brings them comfort or only deepens their loneliness. I wonder if they're still there, still waiting, still hoping for freedom that may never come. And I wonder if someday when I'm old and my time is near, I'll find the courage to sail those waters again, to search for the island one last time, not to stay, never to stay, but simply to tell them that I kept my promise. I remembered. They were real, and they deserved better than the darkness that claimed them. The sea keeps her secrets well. The island guards its prisoners jealously, and the brides of Dracula remain in their eternal exile, beautiful and damned and forever alone. But they are not forgotten, and in the end, perhaps that's the only redemption the cursed can ever hope to find, to be remembered not as monsters, but as the souls they were before the darkness took them. I touch the ring at my throat, Thomas's faith made manifest, and I whisper a prayer into the wind, not for my own salvation, but for theirs. May they find peace, may they find freedom, may they find at last the dawn they can no longer see. And may whoever reads these words, if I ever find the courage to write them down, understand that monsters are not born but made, that humanity persists even in the damned, and that compassion is never wasted, even when it's offered to those who can never be saved. The sea calls to me. The island waits in darkness. And somewhere in the space between memory and dream, 3 women smile and weep and remember the man who chose life over love, dawn over darkness, salvation over damnation. It was the right choice. It was the only choice. But God help me. Some nights, I wish I'd been brave enough to make a different one. The end.